Hello, and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Kier, broadcasting from Brockport, New York, and with me, as always, joining me from Long Island, New York, is Austin Davidson.
Heyo.
Today, we're going to be previewing the Steelers' Week 15 matchup versus the Cincinnati Bengals. The Steelers will be traveling, to the 5-7-1 Bengals and looking for the season sweep. Austin, the Steelers are coming off a 4-game win streak and looking to make it 5. How sweet would this win be over the Bengals, who have been probably the Steelers' biggest rival, if that's what you want to call it, or biggest arch nemesis over the past couple of years? How sweet would a win be this week?
Oh, it'd be great. It's not just a win; it's also eliminating them from the playoffs. So, playoff contention. My bad.
That's true. Yeah.
They really didn't have a chance in the first place right now, but they're still mathematically in it with help. So with the Steelers win here, they're officially eliminated, and that would just be double sweet. So the Steelers get a win, move on to a 5-game win streak, and the playoff chance will look even better for the Steelers.
Exactly. I didn't even realize it. I forgot that. Can the Bengals actually make the wild card, or is there only chance the division at this point, do you think? I think it's only the division.
It's only division. Mm-hmm.
All right. It occurs to me that I left off the injury report because that's the thing we were going to get to next, but I just pulled it up. It's not too different, but the Steelers have ruled out Darius Hayward-Bay and Shamarko Thomas. Shamarko Thomas was a little bit surprising. I was under the impression he was out of concussion protocol. Darius Hayward-Bay being ruled out was not that surprising at all. Something that may have been a little surprising, although he was doubtful, is that A.J. Green was ruled out for this game. Definitely a huge impact player. Definitely, in my opinion, the best player on the Bengals, at least on offense. It's a huge loss for the Bengals to overcome, but they've been struck with the injury bug big time this year, haven't they?
Yeah, they got it rough right from the beginning. A guy that I wanted the Steelers to draft, Andrew Billings, he went down. Their first-round pick went down, who was William Jackson III, I think. And then they lost A.J. Green, of course, which is the biggest hit you could take to your team. It's like losing Antonio Brown for us, except we have more than Antonio Brown on our team. And it's really been bad for them. They haven't had a good year.
Yeah, they also lost Giovanni Bernard, who maybe a little underappreciated in some aspects because he does a lot for that football team when it comes to being a safety valve for Andy Dalton or just being someone who can be a change of pace back for the starter Jeremy Hill. But going forward, some other players who were injured, at least for the Steelers, we have B.J. Finney and Javon Hargrave are also in concussion protocol, but they were full participation in practice. Ramon Foster was a full participation. So is Marcus Gilbert, who showed up with an ankle, and D'Angelo Williams with a knee. We're not sure about their status, but they haven't been ruled out, so right now it looks like they're questionable. For the Bengals, they have a whole bunch of players, including guys like Adam Jones, Brandon LaFell, C.J. Uzomah, I believe is how you say it, among other players on their injury report. How do you say it?
Uzomah. You had it right.
Uzomah? All right, good. So it definitely seems like the Bengals have the worst side of the injuries going on right now. But looking forward to the game, we already mentioned it. The Bengals have a very slim chance to make the playoffs, but they will be fighting for their playoff lives. And you can be sure that they're going to have a lot to play for against the team that they got eliminated by in the playoffs last season. It's like a blood feud, these two teams. And you know what? Earlier in the season, they played minus Le'Veon Bell, minus Vontaze Burfict due to suspensions. That game was surprisingly maybe lacking fireworks is a good term, don't you think?
Yeah, it wasn't very fiery as like the playoff game was last year or the second meeting. I remember the second meeting being bloodbath, but it wasn't the same this year, which is honestly a good thing.
Yeah,
probably.
I think you could make an argument it was more like what the Steelers-Ravens rivalry had been for the past 5-6 years. Last time, which I think they met way back in week 2 this year, if I'm not mistaken. So it feels like a long time ago. And obviously both teams are different now than they were then. But the Steelers are definitely in a better position. They have a lot more to lose than the Bengals do, considering the Bengals are most likely out of the playoffs, even if they do win out. And as we talked about, A.J. Green, who has been lost for a large portion of this season, has just been ruled out. What does A.J. Green bring to the Bengals offense, Austin?
A.J. Green, I really like A.J. Green. First of all, I want him in fantasy really bad this year. He was going to be one of my first draft picks, but I do a keeper league, and the person decided to keep him. But that's besides the point. In real life, he is amazing. He's the Des Bryant to the Cowboys. He's the Antonio Brown to the Steelers. He is the A.J. Green to the Bengals. It's just he is, in my opinion, elite. I've had to argue this several times, and I think he's a big part of that offense. And he is really good and brings a lot to the table. He is a lot of their passing offense, and it sucks for them that he's out. I mean, good for us, but last time, surprisingly, Ross Cockrell kept him in check. I think he only had 38 yards, but I don't think you could do that twice. I think that was a fluke. So if he was playing, I would have thought A.J. Green had a big day.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you think about A.J. Green?
Well, one of the kids I lived with last year, he's a good friend of mine here at school. His name's Ricardo. I'll give him a little shout out there. His favorite player is A.J. Green, and he's a Bengals fan. So I've seen a lot of A.J. Green over the last few years, and I've really grown to appreciate the kind of player he is, especially the kind of work ethic he has. You know, you compared him to Des Bryant. I'm not a huge Des Bryant fan, and while they're very similar in their physical stature, I think they are just polar opposites as far as the way they conduct themselves. And that personally for me, I really respect the kind of player AJ Green is. I think he's often disrespected. Like you said, you have to kind of argue for him about how good he is. He plays so well. He does so much for that team, and he just doesn't get appreciated as much as he should. As guys maybe like Des Bryant and guys like Julio Jones will get appreciated. It's unfortunate for him that he's having to miss this, but obviously he is a huge impact player, and the Steelers are lucky that we don't have to face him a second time, because I agree with you. I don't think he's going to get shut down twice. The only player on the Steelers that's ever shut him down repeatedly with success was Ike Taylor back when A.J. Green was a young player and Ike Taylor was becoming an aging veteran. Also, the thing you have to look at in that first game was that A.J. Green only had 8 targets. Yeah, 2 out of 8 is still a good number, but I'm still kind of surprised Andy Dalton didn't look his way more. Another player that the Bengals don't have is Giovanni Bernard. We touched on him briefly there. I actually think he might be the better of the 2 running backs that the Bengals have. I just feel like the offense is a little more dynamic when he's back there, don't you think?
That's hard for me because I always had a special place for Jeremy Hill. I liked him in college. I did get to see a lot of his college tape. And it hurts me. I think Giovanni Bernard is slightly better and more dynamic, so it does hurt the Bengals that he's not playing.
As far as someone who's a pure runner, I do think Jeremy Hill's a better player. I just think that Giovanni Bernard, the fact that he's a more rounded player, someone who can catch the ball more, someone that does so much and opens up the middle of the field for that offense, I just think he's a little more valuable, especially since he's out. It's now Jeremy Hill has to be the main guy that's catching passes out of the backfield. Another thing that we mentioned is that the Bengals' defense has really taken a step back over the last couple of years where their defense kind of led them. They've now struggled, particularly against the run. Is it injuries? I think is it the fact that they've lost key free agents, guys like Reggie Nelson, or is it just the fact that they just aren't coached as well anymore? I mean, is it just a combination of all 3, do you think?
Honestly, I've never been a fan of their head coach, Mr. Marvin Lewis. I don't think he's that great. I think the Bengals are just finally falling apart. They're aging. They're not good anymore. I don't know what to really blame it on, to be honest. I think they're just becoming worse. They're degrading. There's nothing else to explain it. What do you think?
Well, I know that they lost a couple of key players on defense. I think the injuries have definitely hit them hard. Marvin Lewis is a former Steelers assistant head coach, actually, believe it or not, back in the 90s, but I still think it's amazing that he has a job. I mean, he's a decent coach, but if you can't win in the playoffs after 5 tries, I don't care how good you are in the regular season. That's just simply not getting it done, you know? So I don't know how much long, I mean, the Bengals could surprise me and come out and extend him again, which is what it feels like they always do, but I think his time could be running short with the Bengals here, especially based on the way they've been playing lately. This game will tell a lot about how disciplined the Bengals are. Is there really a strength for this team right now, Austin?
Which team? I'm sorry, Bengals or Steelers?
The Bengals. Is there like a strength without AJ Green? Is there like one thing about them that's like so good?
Nothing stands out to me. Like I go through all their things. Their defensive line should be better, but it's really only Carlos Dunlap and
Geno
oh my
Atkins.
God, his name is
Geno Atkins. Geno Atkins.
Yeah. Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap. The offensive line was amazing last year, and then they lost some guys in free agency, and they haven't really been the same. I've never been the biggest Andy Dalton fan. I mean, he's middle of the pack. He's very comparable to Joe Flacco. Their cornerbacks used to be pretty scary, and their safeties used to be scary with George Iloka and Reggie Nelson. It's just nothing's really stand out. I guess I'd go with the defensive line because of Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins, who are both having a pretty good season. But they're not. It's not even like last year where they were super scary. What do you think? Who's stand out on the team to you?
I completely agree with you. I've always liked watching Geno Atkins play. He's like a monster in the middle there. Someone who I also like is Tyler Eifert. We'll talk about him a little more later, but I liked him a lot last year. I thought he was going to be a sleeper tight end in fantasy football, and I ended up picking him, and he was a huge player for my team last year. But that aside, I just think he's an underrated tight end that gets a lot done for that offense. I guess a lot of things about the Bengals offense has kind of been underrated the last few years, especially this year with the way they've been struggling. But I just think he's a player that can do it all, and I think he's someone that the Steelers really need to be looking out for this week. Shifting focus to the Steelers now, the Steelers have probably their biggest game of the season next week. How do they try to refocus the attention on this week and try to finish strong on the road? This is their last road game of the regular season.
They're just going to have to come out and play Steelers football. Just going to have to go in and it's 1 week at a time. Le'Veon Bell said it several times, 1 week at a time. I think they're good. I think they're focused on this week. They're not going to take a loss to a sub-500 team on the road. They're going to do decent, and they just got to stay focused, and they'll be able to do it.
Here's hoping. The common themes on the road for the Steelers this year have been Ben Roethlisberger's poor play, and if you look at the Bengals, the fact that lately he hasn't been very good at the Bengals. However, it's also worth noting that in his career, I think Ben Roethlisberger's only lost twice or 3 times at Paul Brown Stadium. So while he doesn't play particularly well against the Bengals and they have a good passing defense this year, Roethlisberger just doesn't lose games in Cincinnati. So whether you want to attribute that to his play or just the Steelers, I think the Steelers have a pretty good chance of winning this game, don't you?
I think so. I think the Bengals aren't really that scary this year.
All right, so let's dive into the preview. Looking at the Steelers' offense, what can the Steelers exploit on the Bengals' defense this week?
You know what I think?
What do you think?
I think this is going to be an interesting one. Because unlike week 2, the Steelers have Le'Veon Bell this time against a weak Bengals rushing defense, right?
Yeah.
But just for a reminder, the week 2 game was a very rainy game where Roethlisberger struggled, throwing 2 picks, forcing the Steelers to turn to the run game and having D. Will rush for 32 times for 94 yards. So one would think that this game would be better having Le'Veon Bell, not to disrespect D. Will, but I think we can agree that Le'Veon Bell is a better running back just at this point and stuff. And slightly better weather they're facing. But there's a factor that really puts a damper on this, and we covered it early. And In week 2, the leading receiver in terms of yards was no one other than our favorite Sammy Coates. This was before his injury, and his season went south. And he had 2 big receptions, one being for 53 yards. And as we've definitely seen, Sammy Coates has been doing nothing for the last 8 or so weeks. He's been absent. He's just been gone.
Oh, he hasn't had a catch since week 5.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's incredible. that's a long time. And we don't have Darius Hayward-Bay anymore. I don't remember if he did anything in that game. I can't remember. I can't think of it. But the point is we don't have him to take that spot. So while this shouldn't be close, our lack of wide receiver help is going to keep this game close, sadly. And there are going to be a lot of plays going to tight ends, just like week 2 meeting where Jesse James and Xavier Grimble both got touchdowns. The defensive side of things, I really think the defense, I think we could both agree over the last 4 weeks, has been stellar. Without Cameron Hayward or rookie Javon Hargrave, the Steelers were able to hold the number 1 rushing defense to under 70 yards. The last time the defense played Cincinnati, they struggled and were barely able to record their first sack of the season. I think it was Arthur Motes who got it. It was like a broken play. It wasn't really a sack. What's his face? Andy Dalton got out of the pocket, and Arthur Motes was just able to track him down for the first sack of the season for the whole Steelers. And I think they played much better this time. Rookie Artie Burns, Sean Davis, and Javon Hargrave had time to develop, and safety Mike Mitchell has been playing out of his mind as of recently. I really think the defense is going to keep this game low scoring and do really well on Sunday. What do you think is going to happen offensively and defensively?
Well, to answer your question about Darius Hayward-Bay, he had 1 catch for 7 yards in that game, but he was not. It wasn't the focus of that game. Was not throwing the ball on that day. Going back to the Steelers, looking at what the Bengals have done this year, particularly on defense, they've struggled mightily against the run and ranked 25th in the NFL. That's right, just what the doctor ordered if you're the Steelers, because with the passing game struggling as it has lately on the road, and Le'Veon Bell getting better and better over the last month, that's just something you want as a Steelers fan. This is a huge matchup problem for the Bengals. The Steelers, I expect them to run it right at the Bengals and use the running game not almost exclusively, but I expect them to use it a majority of the time. And I want to see them continue using the formula that's brought them a lot of success over the last 4 games. So I'm expecting a heavy dose of Bell on the ground, not so much through the air as we've seen every now and then, but I expect it's mostly going to be Bell on the ground. And I'm expecting Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, and Ladarius Green to be the main contributors through the air. And I also think Eli Rogers is going to finally stand out a little bit more, but I'll get to that later. So on offense, the Steelers are going to win this game by just eating up time on offense, letting Le'Veon Bell do what he does, and just trying not to force anything. Almost kind of like the Kansas City Chiefs offense, I guess. Until Ben Roethlisberger can figure out the problems he's been having on the road, and until the Steelers get a deep threat back, there's no reason to throw the ball more than you have to, especially when you're playing a team that can't stop the run. On defense, it's been a hard year for the Bengals because their offense hasn't been at full strength. We talked about the injuries. Tyler Eifert didn't play in the Steelers' first matchup against the Bengals this year. Excuse me. We talked about the loss of A.J. Green and Giovanni Bernard. And despite the fact that 2 of Andy Dalton's favorite targets won't be playing Sunday, I fully expect the Bengals to try to beat the Steelers through the air. The Steelers are still ranked 21st against the pass, even with their improved play over the last few weeks. I know the Bengals have seen the Steelers tape over the last couple weeks and the way they've shut down rushing games, particularly last week, as we had mentioned, against the Bills' number 1 ranked offense. 67 yards was the total against the Steelers in that game. 23 of them came in the last 2 carries of the first half that meant nothing to the outcome of that game. So while maybe a week ago I would have expected the Bengals to try to waste a lot of downs just trying to run Jeremy Hill up the middle, I think they're going to realize that they're not going to be able to run on the Steelers most likely, especially if Javon Hargrave will be returning. We're not sure if he is, but if he does, I don't see the Bengals sitting there just constantly just trying to run Jeremy Hill up the middle because I don't think they're going to get anywhere. So I think Dalton's going to try to beat the Steelers over the top, and if you're the Steelers, I want to see them kind of dare Andy Dalton and the Bengals to throw the ball. Dalton is a middle-of-the-road quarterback, as we talked about, but for whatever reason, it just seems like he rarely plays well against the Steelers. It seems like he's off and he's just missing targets. So with that taken into account, I would definitely bring pressure and try to stack up the box, make Dalton try to beat you down the field with guys like Brandon LaFell and Tyler Boyd. Even with the Bengals using a pass-happy offense, I think the Steelers can benefit by stacking up the line, trying to almost completely eliminate the running game without the Bengals even trying. And I always think it's easier to beat a team when you make them one-dimensional. Don't you think?
Oh, yeah. It's super easy. Once you know what they're doing, you know what plays to... You cut down on half the plays you have to call, basically. You don't have to decide whether to rush or pass or what you have to defend against. One-dimensional makes it really easy for the defense.
Absolutely, and it definitely is easier for the pass rushers, and that's something that has definitely been a nice change compared to week 2, where the Steelers weren't blitzing much, and they are now. Listening to some interviews over the past week or so about the Steelers, it sounds like they were not blitzing much in the beginning of the year to try to protect the players in the secondary, which is kind of interesting considering Sean Davis and particularly Artie Burns weren't playing much in the beginning of the year, but they started playing, I think, like week 6 or 8 or something like that, and then they started blitzing more. So for whatever the reason is, they trust them more now, and it's certainly paid off as the Steelers have gotten better play from all over the defense. But who are your players to watch this week, or X factors for both the Bengals and Steelers, Austin?
I'll start with the Steelers first, and offensively, we've said his name for the past 5 weeks straight, 6 weeks. It's pretty obvious. I'm looking out for Le'Veon Bell. Yes, he just came off a record-breaking game last week, and he's just going to continue being amazing this week. It's just what's going to happen. He's against the 25th worst-ranked rushing defense, it's just going to be a bloodfest. He's going to gash them, in my opinion. But on the defensive side of things, I'm looking out for Javon Hargrave. He's been a full participant in practice the last few days, which is suggesting that he's going to play. And I like what I've seen from him in recent weeks, and I think he has a big game. I mean, nose tackles aren't traditionally known for their bull rushing, but in college he was really good for that, and I really like what he's doing. He's usually supposed to be the run stuffer, but I can see him getting a sack this game. It's possible. On to the Bengals side of things. My first X factor is going to be Adam Jones. It feels like this guy is always picking Big Ben off when these two teams meet. Of course, he used to be Reggie Nelson. Reggie Nelson used to be the kryptonite, but now he's a Raider. But Adam Jones already has a pick on Roethlisberger from week 2, and seeing as Big Ben has been struggling, it could easily happen again. On the Bengals' offensive side, this was a hard pick because without A.J. Green, it would have been A.J. Green, no doubt, if A.J. Green was playing. But it was actually hard for me to pick one. I don't offensively. I just really don't like the Bengals. But I will go with the rookie Tyler Boyd. I had watched him a lot in the preseason. I liked him a lot, enough to pick him up in my fantasy team before the season started. But he hasn't really been as great as I thought he would be. Same with Tajay Sharp, but that's another story. Regardless, I think he can make a difference against the 21st ranked passing defense if the Steelers aren't careful. So, who are your X factors and or players to watch?
Really quickly before I get onto that, I just wanted to mention that being a huge University of Pittsburgh football fan, I'm very familiar with Tyler Boyd and everything he can bring to an offense. Also interesting to mention, there was a controversial fumble call at the end of that Week 2 game. I'm sure you remember that, where Boyd fumbled, or did he fumble, and James Harrison recovered. Do you remember that?
I do.
I do like Tyler Boyd. I think he may not be playing as well as he can be, but I still think he's an important player. But my X factor for the Bengals offense is Tyler Eifert. I guess I really like him a lot, but in the early portion of this season, he missed some time, and when he came back, he clearly wasn't himself. Eifert is an underappreciated, big, strong, and skilled tight end in the middle, and with the Steelers, I think that let me back up. With the Steelers likely keying in on the run, in addition to the fact that A.J. Green and Giovanni Bernard won't be playing, Eifert is probably Andy Dalton's favorite target right now, and he has 5 touchdowns this year in limited time. The Steelers are going to want to make sure that Ryan Shazier or Sean Davis don't let him get behind you. Don't let him muscle you down. Just make sure you keep him in your sights and don't let him beat you this week. And on defense, it's the Steelers. It's everyone's favorite player on the Steelers. It's Vontaze Burfict. We can talk for hours about his questionable play over the last few years, about how we think he's a dirty player, about how maybe some people think he isn't as dirty as we think because he's only been flagged, I think, a couple times this year. But setting that aside for the moment, he's also a very skilled player. He's leading the Bengals in tackles, and he quite literally can damage the Steelers' chances at a Super Bowl run like he did last year. While stopping Vontaze Burfict from playing like dirty is not necessarily practical, if someone's going to play dirty, they're going to play dirty. I would want the Steelers to make sure that they impose their will on him or just try to sick as many offensive linemen or tight ends on him as possible. Make sure that they're physical with him, try to frustrate him. Maybe not to the point where he does something crazy, but just make sure he gets a little fired up. Maybe he'll take an unnecessary penalty, and then that can play to the Steelers' advantage. I want to see Roosevelt Nix a lot this week, and I want to see them running some lead blocks with either pulling guards, a pulling tight end, or Roosevelt Nix going right at him and just watching Le'Veon Bell run past him. Furthermore, just if you're the Steelers, just play smart. Keep doing what you've been doing, and don't let Burfict get on your star players for too long. If he's making a tackle, fine, but make sure he's getting up quickly and he's not doing anything crazy. Shifting back to the Steelers on offense, it's kind of hard to go with an X factor at quarterback, so I went with Ladarius Green. It's interesting to note that this year, according to NFL.com, the Bengals give up the most fantasy points to tight ends this season, and the Steelers' tight ends caught 2 touchdown passes in the first matchup back in Week 2, Xavier Grimble and Jesse James. Also, last season, Heath Miller recorded 20 catches in the 2 games against the Bengals. Both games he had 10 catches, and it's just, if you're Ladarius Green, you got to be licking your chops at this matchup. He's a far more prolific and athletic receiver than Heath Miller was probably at any point in his career, and certainly last season. I think Ladarius Green could have another big game, kind of like he did back on I'm losing it. The Giants. I'm sorry. I wanted to say Thanksgiving, but I knew that wasn't true. He had a couple big catches in that game too. Going to the Steelers defense, Mike Mitchell's the guy I have the spotlight on this week. I think the Steelers, like I've been saying, are going to try to take away Jeremy Hill in the Bengals running game, leaving this game squarely on the shoulders of Andy Dalton and the Bengals passing offense. I think it's safe to say that, at least in the secondary, Mike Mitchell's the most emotional and physical player. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, he definitely shows the most heart of anyone on the defense, I would say.
Well, Vontaze Burfict is uniquely, I guess, walking the line when it comes to what's clean and what isn't. If there's a comparable player, I think it's Mike Mitchell, just because of the controversy of his hits on occasion and the fact that he's been fined sometimes in the past. I think it's important for a game that's likely going to have a lot of emotion, a lot of key plays, a lot of close fights. I think it's important for Mike Mitchell to realize that this game, the Steelers have everything to lose in this game, and the Bengals don't have that much to lose. I mean, they are clinging to their playoff lives, but I think they know that realistically it's going to be pretty difficult. So I think they're just going to do whatever they can to try to play spoiler, and I think Mike Mitchell can't be baited into doing things like that. He can't be baited into doing things like Vontaze Burfict did last year. And he's got to be doing what he's been doing the last few weeks, which is playing smart and being physical, but being clean rather than hitting dirty like some other players like Burfict. That concludes my portion on the X Factors. What are your bold predictions for this week?
All right. So, this has been my thought. It's been in my mind for the past week. I don't know why, but something's telling me that Antonio Brown hits a punt return touchdown here. I might be thinking about that game from, I think, 2 years ago, where Vince Williams broke Mike Nugent's nose on a really big hit for Antonio Brown punt return touchdown. And I don't know why that's been replaying in my head. So maybe that's why, but it's just a weird feeling.
No, I understand exactly where you're coming from. Really quickly, that was actually Terrence Garvin on Kevin Hubert, the punter. And the other reason you're probably thinking that is because Antonio Brown, I think, has 4 career punt return touchdowns. 3 have come against the Bengals.
Nice. Okay. So maybe it's not just a weird feeling. Stats back it up. But additionally, I believe the Steelers forced 3 turnovers. A pretty bold prediction for the Steelers. And this, if I predicted this week 4, that would be like the most God-sent miracle ever. But 2 interceptions and 1 forced fumble. Shazier's going to get the forced fumble, and Artie Burns and William Gary are going to get the 2 picks. My final bold prediction is 3 sacks. There's going to be 1.5 for Tuitt. He's going to split with Sean Davis, so Sean Davis gets half a sack. And James Harrison is going to get a sack. What are your bold predictions for this game?
I agree with you in the sense that the Steelers are going to get a turnover. I don't think that the Steelers are going to get 3. The Bengals only have 6 interceptions against them, and I think 2 fumbles lost, so they don't turn over the ball, much in the way that the Bills didn't last week. But Andy Dalton has been sacked, I think, 36 times this year, which is 4th most in the NFL. And with the Steelers' pass rush heating up as it has, I see the Steelers really getting after poor Andy Dalton and sacking him 4 times. I have Tuitt getting 1, and Shazier, Dupree, and Davis getting in on the act. I believe, I think Shazier is going to have 1.5, or no, sorry, Dupree is going to get 1.5, and Shazier and Davis are going to split up for the last sack there. Wait a minute. That doesn't add up right. Sorry. Tuitt and Dupree both get 1.5. That's what I didn't write that down. My apologies. And then Shazier and Davis split for 1. I think the Steelers are going to play very well defensively simply because the Bengals don't have many offensive options. If you can shut down the running game and just key in on Tyler Eifert, particularly in the red zone, you've got Tyler Boyd and Brandon LaFell, and that's about it on the outside. I don't see the Steelers giving up more than 1 offensive touchdown. On the other side of the ball, I think this is the game that Eli Rogers finally has a breakout game and a Steelers win. He had a 100-yard receiving game and a Steelers loss earlier this year, but I think he's going to have 6 catches for 75 yards in the middle with a touchdown. But I think in this game, his stats aren't going to be completely telling of the whole story, where we saw him make plays over the last few weeks where he has a couple catches that are nice, but I think he's going to string together a bunch, and it's going to be kind of maybe not as big as Marcus Wheaton's game against Seattle last season where he had like 11 for 204, but it's going to be something similar like that where he's making some nice third down catches. I think this is the game where one of the Steelers' extra receivers comes through. Going to the final score predictions, what do you think is going to be the final in this game, Austin?
I actually just want to go back to something. I kind of hope it's Kobe Hamilton. Because if I'm not mistaken, Kobe Hamilton was a Bengal at the beginning of this season, and he was on the practice squad, and we took him from that. So I hope it's Kobe Hamilton, just kind of to give the middle finger to the Bengals. But for the score prediction, I am thinking it's going to be a pretty close one and a relatively low-scoring one. I think it's going to come out to 21-13. And what do you think is the final score going to be?
Well, you mentioned real quickly the Kobe Hamilton thing, and I had to check that out because I didn't know that. Yeah, Kobe Hamilton was drafted in the 6th round of the 2013 draft by the Bengals. He was cut by them after his rookie season and then re-signed with them at the end of 2014, and obviously now he signed with the Steelers back in August. So my final score prediction, I think the Steelers are going to overwhelm the undermanned Bengals for the season sweep to the tune of a 27-13 win. Until the Steelers get a consistent deep threat, I just don't see how they're going to score more than 30 points a game. So I think 27 is a good number. It's where they got last week. I think Bell's going to get in the end zone a couple times. I think Roethlisberger is going to probably turn over the ball maybe once or twice, but I think he'll play a lot better than he did against Buffalo. Then again, it's pretty hard to play much worse than he did. We keep saying it, the Bengals don't have many options, and they'll play hard. They may play dirty, but I just don't think they have what it takes to win this game. Is there anything else you wanted to add quickly here before we wrap things up?
Nope, I think we're good here.
All right. I wanted to add one thing quickly. It's been at the forefront of everyone's mind when it comes to Steelers-Bengals over the last couple of years, particularly last year. How do the Steelers make sure that they don't get sucked into the extracurriculars, particularly with guys like Vontaze Burfict, Adam Jones? How do they make sure that they're protecting their players but not going overboard and costing their team? Because you know the Bengals are going to try to agitate them, right?
This is super hard because can you really be mad at a player for getting a penalty after another player goes after another one? What I mean by that is, like, just recently in the Broncos-Titans game, Harry Douglas went after Chris Harris, which is weird. A wide receiver went after a cornerback, which normally you would think it's the other way around. But so he took Chris Harris down, and Chris Harris was out for a few plays. It looked worse at first. But the next play, Akeem Talib lined up on Harry Douglas and immediately took him to the ground and just kind of beat on him because he's pissed. When you're take down one of the top corners in the league, I'd be pissed too. And it's the same with if you were to take down Antonio Brown. I would expect, or I'd honestly hope for one of the other wide receivers on the next play to just ruin that cornerback. If they got the chance. Akeem Talib got a penalty for what he did. And honestly, it's hard for me because I want them to be contained, but if they're really beating up on key guys like Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, and if they touch Bell, well, I want that guy to be hurt. But it's hard for me. What is your opinion on it? What do you think?
Well, let me put it this way. I'm really hoping the officials are going to have better control over everything, unlike kind of like what they did this past game, although there wasn't as much in terms of antics. The way it worked out, particularly in the last two games last season, the officials were garbage when it comes to controlling everything. This game is in Cincinnati. I'm worried that the crowd is going to kind of feed off the players and vice versa. When it comes to not retaliating, it's important to recognize that when something like that happens, the officials need to take control. In the case that it doesn't happen, yeah, you have to defend your player, but at the same time, it can't be mayhem. It has to be controlled. I'm going to take a quick look over to hockey. As a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, for those who don't know, the Penguins won a Stanley Cup in 2009, and they didn't win it again until this past season. A lot of problems they had was that they were kind of a retaliatory team. They'd let teams get under their skin, and then they'd get sucked into antics and stuff like that, and they wouldn't be playing their best. Their coach that they have this past season kind of taught them to always just play their game, and while that's kind of tough sometimes when you can get beat up on or there's dirty plays that aren't getting called, it's just important to realize that, yeah, it might be frustrating, but it's not like you can't, it's not like you have to keep your hands off them. You will get your chances to hit them too. It's football. That's what it's all about. But make sure it's not anything overly crazy that's going to get you ejected or that's going to hurt the team. Make sure you play your brand of football and don't let them suck you into doing something that is going to hurt the team in the future. Because, yes, the Steelers really need this game, but at the same point, you really don't want to end up getting suspended for a game next week against Baltimore, because that's the biggest game of the year. That's my take on it, Austin.
That makes sense. I agree with that. You wouldn't want to get suspended for the Baltimore game.
Exactly.
To be fair, what Akeem Talib, he didn't get suspended for or fined or ejected, so that's what I was hoping for. I see people looking at Steelers-Bengals over the last couple of years, and I just see them saying, wow, don't let anything happen. If anything happens, the guy who retaliates, get him out of there, And then you're looking at disciplinary action. So that's just my take on it. And unless if you have anything else to say, I think we're all set for today. Oh, yeah, I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Austin, thank you for joining me again today. It's a cold Friday night in Brockport. How is it down on Long Island?
It's It's cold here too. It's 20 degrees.
Yeah, it's a nice and balmy. I think it's 14 here right now. A lot of snow, but not. It's Rochester weather. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. We have accounts on SoundCloud, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. On SoundCloud and YouTube, we're just called Stronger Than Steel Podcast. Twitter and Facebook, our handles are STS Podcast 1. We appreciate the follows, the likes, the sharing, any support or feedback you guys have to offer. We just do this for fun here, but we definitely, if there are ways that people think that we could improve, we'd love to hear it. So from me, John Keir, and Austin and Long Island, we wanted to say thank you for joining us today and have a great night.